Hi everyone, this is James, and this is another tutorial based on a user request. I created a tutorial for setting up a character selection menu, but we didn't really go further in depth on how to get that selected character saved so that when the player opens the game again, they have the saved player stored that they used in the session before, or how to kind of instantiate or basically pop that player up when the first world starts up, pop up the last selected player. So this, I broke it down quite a bit simpler. You can see the scene here. I'm going to describe everything in the scene. It'll be a 3-player selection, and it will go to the first environment, and it will basically spawn that player that you chose in the menu. So we'll take a look at it working here first before I explain what's going on. We have our 3 players, which I put 3D text in there, so I'm going to hit play. This is a little button here just to load level 1. Your menus are going to be different or whatever. I mean, you may do it after you select your character and click on him, and animation plays, and then it goes into a loading screen for your world. But for the ease of the purposes and speed in this tutorial, I just created a button here to load our first world. So I'm not going to select any player, okay? I'm going to load level 1, and by default, what happens here is player 1 is spawned in here in our world, which is just a little weird sphere in a plane, but there he is, he's spawned in. That's the case if your player doesn't actually select any character and he never even goes into this menu. You do have to have a case to have a character load into the first level. It will always use player 1 by default, but you can change that. So let's just go and select player 2, and we get some feedback down here in the console, which is character 3 selected, player 3. I'm going to load the level, and player 3 loads up in this is your level 01, your first game environment level. Okay, so he instantiated in there. When we stop hitting play, we hit play again, without selecting anything, and go back to our level, it's stored the value and saved it, and player 3 is still there. I will show you something cool, and I will completely close my Unity and open it back up. Give it a moment. And when I hit play again from here, the save data is still good. We'll load player 3. And there's player 3. Okay? So now I'm going to explain how I set up kind of this functionality here. Okay? So first thing I'm going to do here, and I'll explain this later, and I'm going to do this. This is a delete all PlayerPrefs, which is basically imagine a button for delete all save data. That's what we want to do because I just clicked on a few things and created some saved data for player 3. Just disable it. Okay, so basically in our project folder right here we have materials folder, and this is just holding a material and would hold a texture for we could put that ridiculous looking texture on there. Kind of cool. Basically, these materials are just your individual materials that would be on your player, with associated texture. I've created a folder called prefabs, and these are basically the prefabs for each of your players. It's where you you would create your model and then add scripts to the model for his first-person controller, cameras, whatever. And these are your prefabs that you're going to spawn into the world, and we use them in the selection menu here too. So this is a folder of scenes, and this is basically the character select menu that we're in right now. And then we have our level 01 menu right here, which is your world. It would be much bigger. It'd have trees, mountains, hills. It would be a racetrack. I don't know what it would be. So those are the 2 levels. You'll have probably a lot more levels. We have a script. This is all Unity script or JavaScript. We have one for character selection, one to spawn the character in our world. We have that delete all PlayerPref script that I showed you I used earlier, and then we have a load level button, which is when I hit play, that's what creates this little button right here, and that's a script that's directly just copy and pasted off of Unity's documentation to create a button to allow me to load in the world. So taking a look at what we have in our scene here, in our character select menu scene, which would be your menu, it would be where your characters were standing there playing idle animations or whatever. That's where your prefabs would be dragged into. And so I literally just dragged over the prefabs in here in this scene. Okay, and these prefabs actually, yours will definitely have to have a box collider on it, and you can set it to be a trigger, okay, for all of them. It doesn't have to be a trigger, you can turn that off, and because these are going to be, I can't apply it on multiple objects, but these are going to be the prefabs you're using in your menu. Now, if your character in game has to have a box or some kind of collider on it that's different, like a mesh collider or a capsule collider, and it needs to be an actual collider and not a trigger, then I would suggest in your prefabs here creating a player version, like call it menu player and then game player, and have two prefabs, one for your your character in game, or if you think you can just share your one in your menu here, that's fine. So with that said, we also have the main camera in here, which in your menu could probably be an orthographic camera or whatever, kind of like this. Let me definitely tweak the size or whatever, depending if you want it to be like a 2D game or it's going to be perspective, like I had it. I applied the two scripts to the main camera in the scene, the character select script over here, okay, and the load level button. Now we'll take a look at these couple of these scripts. We'll look at load level button since it's the fastest and most simple. This is if you Google Unity GUI button, and this is like the default script that you get right there. Okay, it's just creates a GUI button to load. Application load level 01, which when you click it, it loads up my first world. Okay, so your buttons and your menus would be different than mine, which is fine. The other one I have on here is the character select script. Okay, and this is what allows me to click with the mouse or what you would touch with the fingers. It all works the same with the collider method. We'll open that up. It has one variable in here called selected player, and all that does is, I'll hit play and show you. When you select the player, it shows you down here in the console character 2 selected, and it also shows you that your selected player is 2 over here, and it's just showing you what the PlayerPref value is being set to. Okay, that's what that one little variable is doing. So looking at our character select script here, it's a pretty simple script. It all fits in this one window. There's what you just saw changing. Currently selected player right here, an integer of 0. Okay, so it's just a 1, 2, 3, or 4, however many you're going to have. Okay, in the update function, which is a function that checks for anything happening every single frame, it's updating every single frame. Bing, 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 bing. So it's looking for mouse input. Cool thing is mouse button, you could use down, so when you click down the action happens, or you can have it to when you lift up on the mouse button and the action happens. Lifting up, get mouse button up, to me feels more natural, kind of like when you're lifting up on the mouse button the action occurs. I think it's what users expect. It also works on iOS, so it would act like a touch. When you let up on the touch, it would shoot this little ray out. So basically mouse button 0 is the left mouse button. I believe mouse button 1 is the middle mouse button, and a 2 in here would be the right mouse button. And this is just code in here that's very standard. I didn't write this. It's provided by Unity for shooting out a ray from the camera at the mouse position, and then a hit variable for where did that ray hit. And then we do our if, which is asking a question saying, hey, did that ray that was shot out, that's going to travel for 100 units out, did it hit anything? Did anything happen? And so down here is where I wrote my custom code in here. And this is where you would put the name of the object that you want to click on that has the attached collider. So I'm going to go back to our menu scene here. The objects here are named player 1, player 2, player 3, and they do have the colliders on them. Okay, so we just say if you hit a collider named player 1, if you hit a collider named player 2, player 3, then commence with this function. Okay, so it's saying if that ray from the mouse button click is hit this collider, then do this, which says selected character 1, and then it goes whoop, and it makes a loop down here, and it goes to this function right here called selected character 1. And each one does this. If it hits this collider named player 2, then goes down to the function called selected character 2, which is right here. Okay, so it's just sending this message down and saying, go down here and do what's in this, in between this bracket and this bracket, or in between this bracket and this bracket. Everything inside the brackets is what's executing. Okay, of course, these names in pink here, if you hit Collider Player 1, yours may be named something different. Okay, so just make sure in this part of the script, whatever your character, if it's named character 1 instead of player 1, name it that. Okay. Then we say else. If your mouse button raycast didn't hit anything, then just return back and do nothing. Okay, and that's just a failsafe for us in case you're clicking into empty dead space and you've hit nothing at all. Okay, so let's go down and look at what happens when you click, player 1, player 2, and these functions. So if you clicked on the player 1 object, then we would get this little cool message here, debug log character 1 selected. And this can be kind of just deleted or removed. And when you're getting really close to your game being final, just remove this or put double forward slashes in front of it and comment it out. Anything with the double forward slashes in front of it, like this right here, is commented out in the code and it's not run. So, or just delete it. And that's what this neat little debug message right here is. And basically it just helps you kind of look and see, is something happening when I'm clicking. Okay. Now next, we're setting a variable called selected player to equal 1. Now that was at the top up here, this selected player that we saw changing when we were clicking on it. There it is. We're just setting that number, which is 0 right here, to 1. Okay? And we do it for each one. When you select character 2, you're setting that same integer or number up there up top to 2 and then 3. Okay? And then PlayerPrefs set int selected player. Okay, so this is what we're doing. This is setting the integer. It's right here using PlayerPrefs, which is Unity's kind of save data. Works on iOS, Android, PC. Works on everything. It's internal saving functionality. So we're going to set that integer called selected player up here to 1. Okay, and this little pink stuff right here is just kind of giving that PlayerPrefs value a name, that we can kind of reference it by a name than, other than just the variable. So we do the same thing down here, PlayerPrefs set int selected player, and then we set that to 2. Okay, and then down here we set it to 3. So that value saves, and then we also take that value in PlayerPrefs and we set it to that. Okay, after it's already been provided right here, we plug it into set integer in PlayerPrefs and it becomes that number. So that's the save thing. The other thing I wanted to say too is I'm looking at the code here. If hit collider name, and honestly, if you want to use the same colliders on your characters in game or out of game, then you can turn off this is trigger functionality. There's a setting in Unity. I'd have to dig in the menu for it. If raycast can hit triggers or whatever, and if raycast can hit triggers is turned off, then our raycasting on an object that's a trigger won't work. So just leave them as standard colliders. Doesn't matter. They don't have to be triggers. So, and that'll help you use the same collider in game. It may not be a box collider. It may be a capsule collider on your character controller or something like that. So the next script, load level button, character select. So we went over this and we went over how this value is being set. When I hit play, we'll set that value or whatever, character 2 selected. We go in and our blue player 2 is in there. So now let's go look into the actual world level and see how this spawning is kind of working. And this is neat because they're already all in the scene, and there's multiple options. You could have no players in the scene and then dynamically kind of instantiate the player and make him appear. But the method that I chose that worked for me and I liked was all of the players were already all there, and they're already all loaded when the level loads up, but we would kind of disable and remove the ones we don't need and only leave behind the one we do need. So I thought that was kind of a nifty setup. So in our world here, just a directional light, whatever your lighting in your world would be. GUI text is just saying this is your level 01. It's just for reference. Doesn't mean anything. Main camera, which does have our script called camera or character spawner on it. Okay, we'll explain that in a minute. Ground plane, which would be your terrain or whatever, and then our 3-player prefabs. And I kind of just spaced them out. You place them wherever you want them. I put -4, the one in the middle is at 0, and the other one's at +4. And then for some reason I just put a little sphere in here. It's like, oh, this is a world. There's a rock or a sphere in it. Okay, so let's look at the camera, and we will go and look in the character spawner script. Okay, and we'll go back first, and you'll see that there are a couple of slots in here for the player 1 prefab, player 2 prefab, player 3, and then the saved player. Now, saved player is just going to pull up data from whichever player we clicked on when we were in the menu, and it's going to plug that number into here. So when I hit play, it'll pop up and say, hey, the last saved player was player 2, right here, number 2. Okay? And these slots are empty, but you'll see that when you don't have to plug anything in manually, that when I hit play, it automatically plugs in each appropriate player to where they belong. And I'm going to show you how that's done in the script. Let's go over to the script real quick. So here are the empty slots, and here is in the script what's creating those slots right here. Player 1 prefab, it's a game object that's creating these empty slots right here to plug in the game objects that represent our players. Alright, this is the next variable that you saw down here, saved player. It's an integer right here. And this is where the script placed in the level will put in the number for the player who was selected and what was saved in PlayerPrefs. Okay? The next thing we have is function awake. And this is kind of, it's one of the ones above, like function update that we saw earlier over here, right here, function update, occurring every single frame. Function awake only occurs when the scene wakes up. And it occurs before the start function, which is actually when things in the scene start going and working. Okay, so this is like the very first thing that would get called in any script. And the reason we're using it is we want to make sure all of this finding each one of the players, grabbing the PlayerPrefs value that we set earlier, and then setting some of the players not disabled and setting some enabled all happens in awake before any of the game actually starts and you start playing. So what happens here in awake is the first thing we do is we take this saved player value, variable we have up here, and we say, well, that's going to equal PlayerPrefs getInt selected player, which back here we had PlayerPrefs setInt selected player. So this is setting the integer, and then when we're in our world, we're getting the integer. So we're grabbing that saved data for selected player, which is what we wrote here in the pink. And you can kind of name that anything you want in there, but just make sure it matches on the getInt too. And so that's going to set this saved player value right here by default to 0 to the number of the saved player. Then we look at these empty slots that we had up here for our players, and then we say, let's go find those when it wakes up here in awake. And we say, all right, find a game object called player 1. And it is named player 1, player 2, player 3. So make sure that these match the name of your character in the world that you want it to find automatically and plug in here. We're just saying take the variable, find a game object with this name, and plug it in there. So it finds all the characters immediately. Then we have a little bit of logic that's saying if this happens, blah, 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 else if this happens, and then else if this happens, and then, well, last case scenario if this happens. So the first one is we want to say, all right, let's look at this saved player. What was saved by PlayerPrefs? If saved player equals 0, and that's basically the case if we haven't selected any player and your user just didn't even go into a character select menu, you'd have to come up with a default case. Otherwise, the game would just like instantiate all of your players all at once, and it would be a horrible bug. So we say if it's 0 and they haven't selected a player or done any character selection, then take the player 1 prefab right here that was found, and then set active recursively true. So it's saying let's take player 1 prefab and set it true. So we're enabling it. Set active recursively, you can look it up on Google or whatever. It's very cool. It'll take the prefab and it'll actually disable or enable everything inside of that as well. Enabled or disabled, just instead of set active recursively, if it was just set active like this, which is legitimate, it would only disable this very top thing right here, only this game object, and then leave all the other ones active. See how we have this activate children only this game object? Well, it would only do that game object. So using the recursively part on it allows it to find every one of its child things attached to it and all components and disable it completely. It's as if it were removed from the world. And then we say, all right, well, let's set player 1 to true. By default, if they don't pick a character, we're using player 1. And then let's set player 2 and 3 to false. So that completely disables them. They're removed. They're not rendering. No scripts are loaded or processed. They just don't exist in the scene. And then we go on for our other cases. Well, if saved player was 1, grab that PlayerPrefs value and set player 1 to true, 2 and 3s to false. And then we say, well, if saved player was 2, if we've chosen player 2 from it, then take player 2 prefab, set him true, and then player 1 and 3 are false. Okay? And so on and so forth for 3 here. Take player 3 prefab, set him true, and set player prefab 1 and 2 to false. So this is the enable and disable and disable. You could copy this, Control C, paste down, fix your indentations, and keep increasing on and on. If saved player 4, and so on and so forth, and then make sure that player 4, and of course go up here and create your player 4 by copying and pasting. Just create more slots and spaces for new players. If you have more than 3 to select from, if you have 12 or 20 or however many players, and just keep adding them by duplicating these lines in here like this and adding new players. And also go back into the other script here, and you'd have to basically copy this whole function too and bring it down and make a new character for, and so on and so forth. And then you'd also have to go in here, copy this, and say if selected player 4, send down to a function down here called selected character 4. And that's how you would kind of add characters. Okay? So that's the character selection. This is the character spawning inside of the world. Delete all PlayerPrefs. Let's go back to our character select menu. I just created an empty game object and renamed it delete all prefs, and it's disabled by default because if it's enabled every time we run, it's going to just every time you hit the play button, it will delete all the saved data. And when you want to delete saved data, just enable both objects, hit play, stop, disable it, turn it off, and then hit play again, and it should just go default back to player 1. Yep. And then you can go on and so forth. So it stays disabled by default. I just dragged that script on over there and applied it to it, and that's just our little handy way of deleting saved data. Just for testing, you'll want to get rid of this when your game is in its in stages. So hopefully this helps you guys figure out how to select a character in a menu, how to set a PlayerPref save data value, and then how to basically set up your own menu for your buttons or however your UI would look to go into your first level, and then it will instantiate your player in that world. And we can kind of look at that set active or recursively true or false. Player 1 has all of his little checkboxes on, and for all of his little sub objects and things that are inside of the thing. And you can see how he's brighter and these are kind of grayed out a little. So we look at this, completely, kind of turned off. All the things in there that don't need to be on or whatever. The master is unchecked. Okay, so we're not having to worry about that player in the world. Pretty cool, right? So that kind of concludes the tutorial. As usual, this is in the video description as a downloadable Dropbox link. So I hope this helps you guys, and this whole full Unity project here will be available for you to download and just use it for any commercial or non-commercial purposes that you wish. You can use the exact scenes and this nifty cube artwork. Well, I hope you all have a good day.